Good evening. Thank you for being here. What was once considered just a hobby has grown into a cultural and economic powerhouse where people of all ages, backgrounds come together to play. According to the State of Gaming in 2024 report, the gaming industry is valued at 184 billion, now generates more revenue than the combined box office and music industries. With 2.4 billion players worldwide, more than a third of the global population, gaming is driving trends and innovation every day. As generative AI reshapes the boundaries of the virtual world, it gives rise to experiences that are more immersive, personal, and dynamic than ever. Good evening and welcome to Pixels and Play, Reimagining Gaming with Artificial Intelligence. My name is Asad Lalji. I'm the CEO of Avid Learning. We're delighted to be back here at IFB, our home for Gen AI series. Our last collaboration here on AI was Music and AI in August. Since 2023, Avid has explored the transformative intersection of AI and the arts, decoding its influence on the visual arts, literature, design, written word, cinema. We've done a series of workshops on AI and writing, AI and design thinking, and talks and symposiums on AI and the law, and looking at the intersection of AI and cinema, literature, music, and today we are looking at gaming. And brings me the task at hand. IFB and Avid Learning presents Pixels and Play, Reimagining Gaming with Artificial Intelligence and Immersive Conversation with leading technologists exploring the potential of Gen AI, its visual effects, game design, and the growing intersection of media and technology. A special thank you to Arjun, Sarita, Maitri, and the IFB team for their continued creative collaboration. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our panel of experts, co-founder and CEO of Duality AI, Apurva Shah, artist, UI UX designer, and game developer, Frank Harmon, video games industry consultant, Samir Desai, and our moderator for the evening, head of gaming, APAC, Google Cloud, Samir Pitawala. Look forward to a fascinating conversation. Thank you all for being here, and over to you, Samir.
Hi, thanks a lot for everybody for being here. Great to have you. I'm Samir Pittalwala and excited to have an awesome panel. So thank you all for taking out the time, and thank you, Asad, for inviting us. So to kick things off, maybe I can do a quick preamble in terms of the history of how AI and gaming have actually interacted with each other over the years. There's a very rude child over there. I totally blame the father. It's interesting because Demis Hassabis, who's the co-founder of DeepMind, recently made a statement about how games are the gateway to AI. And when you actually dig into that, it's also been because he's also been a game developer and designer. He's been a chess grandmaster. And if you look at the history of AI, they've always used games as a way to simulate reality and to train AI within that. So examples of this are AlphaGo, which was sort of like a neural network that Google did in order to then defeat Lee Sedol, who was the grandmaster in Go. Go for many years was looked at as the Mount Everest of AI because apparently there are more moves in Go than the known atoms in the universe. So the probability of which move you can make in Go is just phenomenal. So it was always expected that, you need a sense of deep intuition, and in many ways, the top Go players were looked at as almost as artists because they were able to kind of come up with these moves in some sort of latent space, and it was looked at as a big challenge for AI, and it shocked the world when AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol and then other grandmasters pretty convincingly. And what was interesting is this move called Move 27, which is when till that time AlphaGo followed to everybody's surprise a losing strategy. And in Move 27, it kind of surprisingly came up with a move which for maybe about thousands of years of Go being played had never been seen before. And that's when people got shocked to see almost what seemed like creativity in an AI you creating a move out of, what seemed like an absurd strategy. And it is said that it was, the creation of seeing Alpha go defeat these champions shocked the Chinese government, because Go is so revered in Asian cultures, including in Korea and China, that it shocked them into waking up about AI. So in many ways, sort of, that became a pivotal moment in this arms race now that we see between, this idea and the rhetoric of that if you own AI, you'll own sort of the next generation of power. So it has a deep role to play, not just in geopolitics and so on. So today's conversation, that is just an example. Then obviously there's Alpha Star, and there have been many other things. And recently, I think in this year, Google's kind of done and I know I'm probably pushing a point here about, their leadership in the space, but generally I think because, in 2024, Genie 1 released, and I think in February, and now just last week, Genie 2 released, and it's gone from generating 2D games to generating 3D games. So it's been pretty fantastic to see the crazy amount of work that's coming out. And before I conclude, I just wanted to use that as a bridge to understand the difference between AI and gaming and how they both fed off each other. And I hope that today's conversation kind of sheds light on the various dimensions as an artist, as somebody who's deeply involved in the gaming industry, and also as, people say that games are, and it's pretty obvious that it's a subset of simulation. So it'll be interesting to get thoughts on that. And to kick things off, maybe I'll use a quote by David Holtz, which is the CEO of Midjourney. And his quote, which I think he said roughly about a year and a half back, was that in the future, consoles will just be a giant AI chip, and all dreams will be just games. So the fact that you can synthesize your dreams into games into 3 dimensions. So that's pretty trippy as a quote. So let's start with in alphabetical order.
Do you want to do an intro?
Yeah. Just an alphabetical order for Apurva. Do you want to kind of and first start off with maybe a quick introduction about you, Frank, and Samir, and the work you all do, and then maybe I'll launch into a quick question on each one of those.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for the setup, Samir. So my name is Apurva. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Duality AI. My journey actually started in a very different place. I started in animation. Actually, I worked at Pixar for most of my career. Working on films like Finding Nemo and figuring out how you simulate underwater dynamics and fishes, and in Ratatouille, like how do you deal with food and all aspects of food. So simulating how you might cook to how actually food looks and the simulation of the physics of food. So for me, like I would say, simulation is a big part of my life. And gaming, of course, is a very interactive form of simulation. It's a very hands-on and a fun way for people to interact with simulation. So as Samir pointed out, you can think of games as a subset of simulation in some ways. Simulation is equally relevant to the real world. So the work we do is generally with teams that are working on robotics or AI, and we use a lot of tools and solutions from the gaming side. So we partner very closely with a company called Epic Games that makes the Unreal Game Engine. And we make these tools available for engineers and to run what's called serious gaming. So that's sort of my focus. And AI, of course, has been very interesting. For us, AI is actually both sort of tooling in the work we do and the kind of simulations we create. But it's also what most of our customers do. So we are both consuming AI in our work as a sort of tool, but then we're also producing data in a virtualized way for AI and robotics. So we've kind of seen it a little bit from both sides. And again, I think I'll just close out with one thing before handing over to Frank, which is, in Vedic philosophy, we talk about this idea of Maya or illusion, right? Which is really, if you think about it, is a form of simulation, right? Like our forefathers, have figured this stuff out, I think, a long time ago. And what they've said is like everything we experience with the world is basically perception. It's a form of there's no reality except what's in our head. And so in that way, you know, one of the interesting things with gaming and AI is, you know, in gaming, basically humans and AI are effectively on a level playing field. In our physical world, AI struggles, right? It can't collect information, it cannot act on the world. But when you're inside a game, AI and humans are essentially the same and have the same sort of agency. And that's one of the really interesting things. I mean, that's why DeepMind, I think, has worked a lot with games as a way to explore, you know, AI. But yeah.
Hi, my name is Frank Carmen. I am on the actual development side of gaming. I have been a art director for probably since around 2014, but before that, most of my work involved concept art, UI, UX, animation, 3D modeling, like basically run the entire spectrum of everything in gaming. Currently, I work primarily as an art director. I have been offered tools in AI from various different like production companies and just basically testing it because it's a part of my job to test these new technologies. I will say I'm probably the most cynical person about AI on this panel. I'm going to be like kind of the wet blanket here and say I have not been very impressed by anything of the generative AI tools that I have seen. But, you know, I would love to have my mind changed because if you can take the more tedious parts of my job and make it automated, I would love that. I would love to work on the more exciting things. I know as a young 3D artist or even concept artist, I hated working on garbage cans because that is what every 3D artist and concept artist has to do at the start of their career. So those sorts of tediums do exist. I have yet to see an AI pass a mediocre level of talent in order to pass that. But so that's my wet blanket statement. So, you know, just know that for those of you who are also wet blankets about this stuff, know that you are all represented up here. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Sameer Desai. Unlike the three of them, I have no technical background in gaming or coding. I got my start in the gaming industry as a journalist. I used to write and review games. Then I eventually started getting more and more involved in the industry. About 10 years ago, I launched India's first gaming festival. It was a large-scale B2C event where we got all the big brands from around the world to give Indian consumers a chance to see what gaming was all about. For the last 5 years or so, I've been working with companies around the world that are looking to expand their gaming businesses in India. So whether that's market research, business development, marketing for their new launches, that's what I primarily do. So I guess I will bring more of the consumer side perspective to it as opposed to the technical. So.
Great, thanks a lot, ton for that, Sameer. So Frank, let's start with you, right? You seem to be, like you said, the wet blanket, right?
Sure.
So the first question to you really is that, do you think in your current workflows and pipelines, have you begun to use any of these? Like, are you using Midjourney for texturing, for looking at UI, UX at scale? Like, how are you using it at all? And secondly, has it helped in any way?
So the only time, so I have not personally done it other than like testing scenarios. I do know that environmental modelists have used it for like a couple of different things, like primarily for texturing. Like, so say if a environmental artist needs a quick skybox for their level, they can say, okay, Gen AI, generate me some clouds, basically, in a dome shape. They do have to do a little bit of editing around that because basically when you tell Midjourney, generate me a cloud skybox, it's just going to be a flat plane. So they do have to take it into Photoshop and like, you know, turn it to a bowl and do a little bit of editing. But that has been, it's stuff like that has been a thing. Like, so if also a environmental artist needs like some trees, just like 2D texture trees or something like that, they will also use it for that. But it's not anything I would necessarily ship. It's mostly been stuff that have been used primarily for prototyping. And like sometimes some of that stuff might seep into the final game. But it hasn't been like, I have not seen that used too often.
So if I have to cut to the chase and ask you whether
Yes.
you are worried about AI replacing artists, the gaming industry globally has been bleeding people. India is a little bit of a nice little warm spot for it, given that gaming is looked at as a sunrise industry. But post the pandemic, a lot of jobs have been lost, and most of them have been in the art departments because those are the ones which are heaviest. And a lot of the game companies are rationalizing, even if they're not using AI, saying that the use of AI won't need us to have these many artists. So do you see this as a hard place to kind of build a career in?
So I actually, like, if you asked me a year ago, I would have been very sour about this. I would have been like, oh my God, like, what are these guys doing? This doesn't work that well. You're losing all this talent. You have certain CEOs saying, don't let your kids become engineers because we won't need engineers anymore. That's a terrible statement. But like, in this current climate, I'm actually seeing companies kind of like do like a little bit of rehiring back. I've talked to friends who lost their job like a year ago. They were all expecting some giant like sundowning moment for the gaming industry. Like, I'm honestly at a point where I am not that worried about it anymore.
And Samir, while Frank spoke about sort of using AI to talk while designing games, there's a whole bunch of things that go into making games, right from designing them to marketing and advertising them. You spend a lot of time in those parts of the chain. Do you use AI in any ways, and do you see it change your life?
I mean, the basic usage of Gen AI is, the writing stuff, planning stuff. But beyond that, I mean, from a consumer perspective, I think whether it's someone in the marketing space or whether it's even the end consumer, they really don't care whether AI was used to create something, as long as the experience is good. So I think we're still so early in the Gen AI implementation in gaming that we haven't seen real use cases of Gen AI. It's very small, because I think even the big game companies are very cautious about how they kind of jump in to using
So
Gen
any
AI.
of your clients, what are the things that they look for when they're saying, okay, if you're using this to create a press release or to create a generated image for one of my titles, are you seeing any pushback saying this is an IP problem or there's any issues around that?
Not really. I mean, at the end of the day, you can take inspiration and ideas, but eventually what you put out has to be your own. I mean, there are ways that you can use AI to your benefit to like streamline mundane tasks, but at the end of the day, what you put out as the end product has to be your own and has to be original. So that is something that that no one compromises on. But of course, those tools are useful. Use them to an extent.
And as a purveyor in India, with where generally people believe that the design talent is very scant in games, and there's a lot of dev talent. They believe there's a lot of arms and legs, because historically Rockstar, Electronic Arts have all had their outsourcing shops here. Ubisoft. Do you see how are you seeing it when you talk to game designers locally? Like, you have a lot of indies coming up. I believe in India now there's some 700 odd studios. There used to be like not more than 150 gaming studios. What do you think is sort of their future? You think it's a good thing for these AI tools to come because it makes them cheaper, efficient, probably helps them with game design, documents which they otherwise wouldn't? Or do you think it's a net negative, given that it's a really early stage industry that's still finding its feet and this could potentially be inflationary?
I think in India, the studios that we're seeing now who are doing really creative stuff, they're very small. So I think Gen AI can help them with prototyping, coming up with quick concepts that they can either iterate on or discard and move forward. I think, like you mentioned, India has a lot of big gaming companies that only outsource work here. They don't create here. They don't lead projects. But what we've seen in countries like China, like recently this year, there was a game called Black Myth Wukong, which was made by a new studio, which was a global hit. But the guys who founded it, they began working in these big, what we call sweatshops, gaming sweatshops, for example. But they gained that experience, and now they're creating original games based on Chinese mythology, which are global hits. And the same is happening now. Like recently, IGDC, I think we were all there, and there's some really creative, small kind of indie games, and they're using Indian themes, Indian art styles, Indian mythologies is inspiring these games. So I think it's a matter of time before those these studios and those games mature to a level where not only Indians but globally players will want to play those games.
That's an interesting point you brought out, right? Like I think I saw a post recently when Warhammer, which is the new Warhammer
Space
came
Marine
out, Space Marine 2 came out, and also around the same time Black Myth Wukong came along, and people said that no AI, no BS, it's still a great game, it's still a big hit. Like it didn't have to, none of these studios had to talk about any of that just to make something that was fun and playable. Apurva, given your sort of background, and I think, really what we wanted to get to was really the future of some of these things on a more fundamental level. Could you, for the purpose of the audience, succinctly describe what a game engine does?
Sure. So game engine essentially represents a scene. So it could be this room, and the chairs in it and the table. It represents movement and behavior within the space. So you can have the player, of course, the player avatar. You can have other what are called non-player characters, and they all have behaviors. Objects can have behaviors. If I drop the phone from the table, it should fall correctly and potentially shatter or bounce or whatever the game is trying to do. And then, of course, you have to render the scene. We have to be able to visualize. So there's an internal representation of the 3D, what we would call the 3D scene, and some programmatic representation of these behaviors. But then for a player, for a human, in essence, to be in the loop and interact with this scene or with this game, it needs to have a visual representation and then a way for, again, the player to be able to interact with it. So fundamentally, that is what a game engine does.
And if one was to say it, a bad summarization may have been that it could be, it simulates a world.
Sure.
Right? Just like our brains simulate our world, to use your reference on Maya. But it seems that, this could be an interesting, like this year with AI, it seems like these game engines, which have for years dominated sort of, they have been the de facto standard of how games are built.
Right.
But this year, people are debating whether that's going to be the future.
Yeah, no, so I have been doing
and
this.
And I want to kind of segue that before you answer with a quote. I think Jensen mentioned just earlier this year that he believes in 5 years, all pixels will be generated and not rendered. And that's, this is a guy whose chips in many ways helped us.
He's got a vested interest.
Yeah, but I think he wants to sell the Blackwells more than the G-forces. What's your view on that? And for the purpose of the audience, I think it will be helpful to also give a distinction about why this could be pretty different. Right. The whole industry will have to re-understand how to build a game.
Yeah. So, let me actually start by saying that I'm a humanist, actually. I believe strongly in human creativity, and that technology is essentially in support of that creative endeavor. I also believe that you can't strip mine a human created data ecosystem to just train models and not reward that ecosystem back, because it's not sustainable. Just like the environment is not sustainable if you basically rape it and just take everything but give nothing back. If you basically strip mine these data ecosystems which have been created by artists, whether it's writing or game art or anything, right? So I think that the tech companies are currently definitely there are ethical things, behavioral things that they're doing that aren't necessarily sustainable in that way. But putting those things aside, so I'll kind of approach the question more from the standpoint of an engineer and a technologist, right? Because technology is neither good or bad. It's what we do with it, right? So let's assume positive intent, right? So I think what's interesting is that I've been doing this for a long time. When I started in animation, it was with a 60-person studio called PDI. We were doing basically news opens. We were using computers to do news opens and things like that. And then Toy Story happened, right around in the in early late 1990s, and kind of changed everything, right? And I've actually been to a Disney studio in Orlando, right, that laid off a bunch of layout artists at that point. If you had looked 10 years ago, that Orlando studio was essentially the state of the art in animation, right? And here you had these layout artists that were desperately trying to convince us. I'm a kid, like at that time I was a kid. These guys were veterans, right? They were amazing artists. I still believe they're far more talented than I'd ever be. And yet, they were basically trying to prove to us that, hey, listen, I can pick up how to use a 3D software. At that time, it was not game engines, it was non-real-time 3D software that we would use to create, images, 2D images. And honestly, I felt really bad. But we couldn't, I could take a student out of college who would have essentially more innate talent in 3D software, right? So the unfortunate thing is that technology often brings about disruptions. They're not always comfortable, but I do believe that some of the boldest artists, John Lasseter, who's one of the founders of Pixar, I mean, he studied traditional animation at CalArts, right? And yet he was one of the artists who saw the potential that the computer would have in storytelling. Now, and I know, Ed Catmull, who's the technologist, he was the other co-founder, he was my boss at Pixar. But if I were to ask Ed, about AI, and in fact, I did ask him about it, at a conference, and, he has obviously, again, the same humanistic view, but I would argue that when you're, so steeped in a certain way of working, it becomes very difficult to sort of remove yourself from that context. I mean, this is literally the definition of disruption. It's a thing that comes from, it blindsides you, knocks you out, right? And I think that a lot of the folks who will adopt AI, I believe, as creatives, as artists, will do it in ways that we don't even expect, right? We don't even think. And they'll be bold about it, they'll be brash about it, they will not care what anyone thinks or says or what can be done or can or can't be done. They'll break it in 100 ways, and then they'll make something really new. I mean, we've seen this cycle again and again, and I don't think AI fundamentally changes that. It doesn't make it more or less. I think it's just it's just the reality of how it is. So speaking in terms of game engines, right, I think that I said before that you have a scene representation, you have these programmatic behaviors, and then you kind of have this rendering or some form of visualization and interaction for these things. Now, what if I just told you, okay, forget about building these things explicitly, right? What if you could just dream them up, right? And that's literally what Jensen Wang is talking about, right? We are starting to see some very interesting, very early, so this is don't imagine,
it's literally a week old.
Yeah, it's imagine it's in pre-toddler phase, right? But, you've got companies like Google DeepMind that just released Genie 2. Genie 1 was on 2D, so it was only able to do 2 dimensions of kind of visualizing a game. Genie 2 is in 3 dimensions, but still super, super limited. And I can tell you the 99 ways it simply doesn't work, and the one way it's kind of interesting, but you see that early signs, right, of where this could go. There's another company called World Labs, which is doing some experiments in this. There's open source, so it's not just big tech. There's a team out of University of Waterloo, and partnering with some other folks that they've done an open source model called the Matrix.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think that these models are evolving faster than game engines are?
Always new technology evolves faster because they can afford to break things. They don't have legacy.
But that's the point. The tech debt on game engines seems pretty deep.
It's high, and today, when you've got let's say 5 million lines of code, or probably even more for Unreal Engine, I'm guessing. You make, when you make changes, you have to be very careful. You don't break a bunch of stuff. You have to worry about production studios who've got, whose games are riding on your engine, and you can't afford to break those things. While if you're building one of these new, game diffusers, or what are called world models, right, or world simulation models, you can just do whatever you want. You can break it, it doesn't matter.
What's your advice to Frank? Yeah,
boy,
before,
I
just like,
would-
what's your advice? Frank wanted to know whether he can be a convert or not. Like, and having seen these cycles at Pixar, would your advice be to Frank to dig his heels in, or would your advice be, Frank, maybe give this a shot, frankly?
I just don't think creativity works that way. I believe, right? Like you can't just say, oh, I'm going to become an AI person because
Yeah, but
you woke
like,
up one fine
would
morning.
you like to
right?
nudge him to use some of those tools, or would you say that no, stick to it? Or what's your view? What's the right path for any artist in the room to not be?
Frank wants to. Say.
Well, yeah. I'll ask Frank.
The right path for any artist in the room is to keep making art and not to rely on things like crutches like AI. It is 100% for any artist, and I'm not talking about studio or production or whatever. For an individual artist, AI is 100% a crutch. It's designed that anyone can use it. Keep to your fundamentals and keep to your craft and keep working at it, because you might be frustrated now, but you are 1,000 times better than any AI. That's my point.
You know, to kind of give this some context, I saw this happen in the world of video, right? Like YouTube fractured the whole idea of what anybody could do to produce video, and then you suddenly had these units centered around creators, where there were small units of 4, 10 people, and teams went from 100 people productions to literally 4 to 10, and now with these video models being embedded inside of YouTube, you could probably just do it with a team of 2 or 3. So Samir, my question to you is that, do you think this is a good sign, given, like, I believe YouTube released a report maybe sometime year before last and said it contributed like $1 billion to the Indian creator ecosystem. We'll come to you, Apurva, shortly. But when
Your Honor,
sure, 100%. Before we go to Samir.
So I guess I just want to point out that, I mean, Frank, what you're saying is not, I think, mutually orthogonal to what I'm saying, right? Like, I think anyone who's going to create anything interesting has to have something interesting to express. They, like you said, they have to be, they have to know their craft. And again, this is just another tool, right? So, yeah.
No, let me be perfectly frank. I'm not a Luddite. I have been using technology my entire life to create art. I became a game dev because I loved technology. And the beauty of making things is the process of making it. That's ultimately what every artist should achieve. My main point is that if you want to be a oil painter or a concept artist or makes 3D models, is that you have to put your hands in the clay. You can't rely on a median of images off the internet to help you out. You have to use your own intuition and your own humanity and your own experiences to do it. That's basically my point with any sort of individual artist.
I wish you were in violent disagreement. It would make my job as a moderator much better. The conversation would just, procedurally continue. But Samir, my question to you was, do you see this as a boon, like you see what YouTube and video did, and with these tools coming to studios and platforms like Roadblocks, I believe, are doing very well here, Minecraft, Fortnite. Do you see this as a boon to kind of build out this layer of what people say lacks in India, which is a good design ecosystem, not the dev ecosystem?
I think to use the YouTube example only, like for example, it's becoming easier and easier to produce video content on YouTube.
Yeah.
But if everybody is making reaction videos, for example, it still becomes hard, which is like how do you stand out in that? So it's going to apply the same way to AI. We can all use AI to make games, but how do you make your game stand out? And human creativity is still that thing that's going to make it stand out. So you can use how much ever you want of AI or any tech, but if you can't let your creativity kind of show in that, it's still going to be lost in the crowd. So it's going to be the same way as with YouTube.
It's interesting, your job and your practice, not job really, your practice as a UI UX artist. I see a lot of this thing called applied game mechanics, where people take the things that make games addictive and use it nowadays in India for dating apps, and they're using it for everything, including virtual girlfriends have become really popular in India, especially in Hindi. So are you seeing, in some way, it's not AI in games, It's the abstraction of games in terms of what are the most addictive properties of the game loop, and then using them in these sort of social settings with UI UX, which essentially acts as sort of like a frontier layer for people to interact with. Do you have any views on that?
So when I started my career, the thing was gamification.
Yeah.
And basically, how do we gamify the world to brush our teeth?
Yeah.
Can we level up our our teeth brushing abilities? Yeah. And basically, you would go to Walmart and you would put your credit card in. And it's like, oh, you bought your second toothbrush in the last 3 months, and you get a point ahead. Of course, none of that really fell into fruition because that's a bit insane. Yeah, so there is a bit of a gamification of like different processes, like especially with online dating. Like if you use it, basically as long as you stay on the app, they want to keep you on the app. So they will try to incentivize you, and level bars filling up are a great way to do that. I don't know how pertinent it is. Honestly, I don't care what level I am in any sort of app that I use or anything like that. But I know lots of people love min-maxing, which is the practice of trying to put as much skill points and everything else into something so you get the most powerful character first. I know there is a gamer who exists that way. I don't exist that way. I don't know if the regular public really works that way, but there is a certain sort of slot machine mechanic to most apps for anything. Yeah.
And Apurva, do you see sort of this? You said you are in this business of serious games, right? I'm assuming a lot of your simulation models, while you may not be able to talk about it publicly, would be used by space agencies, military firms, etc. How are you seeing AI being used in serious games right now? Beyond just simulating physics and simulating robotics, where does AI come into the use in serious games outside of the fun part of the world, the consumer tech as we call it?
So I'll give you actually an example for how we use it right now. So this is public information. So we did a project for several years with DARPA, which is one of the leading research agencies in the U.S. They actually the ones who came up with the internet, believe it or not, and the ultrasound machine. But so they wanted to explore. So interestingly, they self-driving cars started with a challenge that DARPA did in 2006, 2008, which my co-founder was a part of. And that sort of kicked off self-driving cars, and people thought, we'll have them in 5-8 years at the most. And 20 years later, we're still, Tesla, for example, hasn't yet been able to get approval on a self-driving car software. And so what DARPA was interested in is to actually go beyond driving on the road. So if you think about driving on the road, it's like we were talking about with Genie, it's a 2D problem. I mean, you've got a road network, and you've basically now trying to figure out, how do I follow that network? How do I avoid collisions? How do I not hit something? Driving off-road is a much, much more difficult problem because every second you have to make a decision. Do you want to go left? Do you want to go right? Do you go faster, slower? And so in robotics, it's kind of considered the next holy grail is solving that problem. And my co-founder, like I said, participated in DARPA, Mike, and the DARPA agency as well realized that you can't do this anymore without simulation. Right? It just takes too long to do it in the physical world. It's too expensive. And so we were a part, so they brought us on as a simulation partner. And we worked with NASA JPL and a few other teams, basically taking their vehicles. So we call these digital twins. So you can take pretty much any environment, you can take any kind of a machine or a system, you can take different props and turn them into digital equivalents, which we call digital twins. So they both have the visual representation, the physical representation of that real world object or environment, as well as its behaviors, right? And then if you sort of look at that virtualized world, remember what I said before about gaming and simulation more broadly as being this place where AI and humans are kind of on a level playing field. These vehicles essentially have a software brain, right, that drives them. I mean, even if you look at, again, the Tesla self-driving car system or the Waymo system, There's a software that's basically driving, just like we've got software in our brains. There's software that's driving these vehicles. And so what they do is they basically drive these vehicles for many, many, many thousands of miles, essentially in our simulator. And then that software is refined that way, whether it's an AI-based software or a more of a traditional coded software. You can find problems much more quickly. And one of the interesting things that you can do, and where we use AI actually, is to start bringing variations. So you never know, right? I mean, you can drive thousands of miles, but it's really those edge cases, it's those weird things that happen that you're looking for, because that's where you can learn. Frankly, AI is trying to learn. And so one of the things that we can do is ask AI to create different situations, different scenarios that we may not even have thought about, or even the makers of the vehicle would not have thought about. And then we want to see in simulation how does that vehicle software respond. So that's one example. Yeah.
And do you see sort of one part? I think this whole conversation has been frank, and then we can talk to Samir as well as on his views on this. Is the how you use AI to potentially replace UI, UX, and in terms of how does it help with the artwork and make it. But there's a whole different space on how you can use it to potentially make a new kind of game with emergent game designs. Have you played around with any of that, and what's your view on that?
So, I would say if that you wanted to make a game to develop specifically for AI, it would probably be fairly niche. This would not be like a AAA game that I can think of. Like, I can't imagine like GTA having a AI mechanic in it.
Casual, I think.
Yeah, it would be a like very niche
card-based.
Yeah, some sort of indie game sort of thing. I can imagine like a Rorschach test type game where you're trying to something along those lines. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it would be a game for me. But I'm sure it would have an audience somewhere. Like there's all sorts of niche games out there that are very cool.
What's your view, Samir? You think that there's a whole new kind of game creation where it's not designed by what you may call as a erstwhile game designer, but it's sort of like the building blocks are put in place, and then there's emergent design that takes over?
I think more exciting right now for me is to see how the games we're already playing, and we notice that there are roadblocks that human creativity is not able to break through, and how possibly Gen AI can come in. And I think there's two examples that I can mention. There's a game called No Man's Sky, which is basically you get into a spaceship, and the promise is that you can take off and travel the universe endlessly, and wherever you go, it will generate new planets, life forms on those planets. And currently they have their own models where it generates based on their existing rules. Gen AI could potentially go beyond that and make those worlds more lifelike, make them more livable, or feel like they're lived in, and make them more immersive, for example. The other one, which is more rooted and more, I think, relatable, is like many of you may know of the FIFA games, the football games, they call EAFC now. And the whole idea of these games is to achieve realism, to kind of replicate the broadcast that you see of a football match in a video game. And it's got really far in terms of visuals and how well it plays. One area where it's always kind of held back is the commentary. So they have the budgets to do hundreds of hours of commentary from real life commentators. But the way games work is that it can't kind of accurately depict what's actually happening on screen, and so there's a disconnect there. So if Gen AI can come in and be trained on those commentators' voices and then create live commentary while you're playing, which actually depicts what's happening. Now again, there's lots of ethical issues there. There's privacy issues there. There's copyright issues there. But this is where human developers have hit a roadblock. They're not able to accurately deliver commentary for a live sports game. So I think that those kind of areas where we've been trying for years and years and years and generations to kind of achieve realism, and we were not able to, I think Gen AI can come in there. But like I said, again, there's ethical considerations, there's copyright and privacy considerations as well.
How much of, there's this recent interview with the New York Times and Sam Altman. I think they kind of began to ask hard questions on sort of the training data that goes into this. Frank, what's your view in terms of this? Do you feel anything about, what's your view on these artist rights around some of these models, and maybe your ArtStation link has been used to train stuff using that, and how do you feel about that, and what is your view on, is there a solve for it?
Yeah, there's a solve for it. Pay me. Pay me, yeah. I'll give me royalties on it and perpetuity throughout the universe and everything, and I would be very happy with that. Yeah, go ahead. Use my art if you pay me. That's been my policy ever since I started my career.
And now that these guys have gone ahead, some of them have gone and trained, do you think, is there a way that you think that you can put the genie back in the bottle?
So I don't know if there is a way. I'm sure if you could crack open the egg of whatever they're generating off of, you could probably see, I'm sure there are some hashtags in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But I also think that they kind of want it designed so that you can't find those hashtags. Because ultimately, if there are those hashtags, then an artist can put like a poison pill in their artwork and have it, scramble up the pixels.
That's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, no, it exists. It's called Nightshade, and you can just Google Nightshade, and you can get that for your programs, artists out there who don't want their artwork stolen. But yeah, ultimately, if you want to use their artwork, I don't mind if you scrub my ArtStation, but you pay me royalties. That's yeah.
Recently in Hollywood, there was the SAG-AFTRA strike, which was basically film, television writers and actors were on strike over very different issues. But that strike has now extended into performers who work in the video games industry, because we're starting to see voice actors, voices, like they're being signed to contracts where, okay, you've recorded some dialogue for us and we want permission to use your voice to create additional dialogue using AI. So these unions are now stepping in and saying, okay, where do we draw the line and where Gen AI can be used to kind of use human creativity and human voice endlessly and beyond their control to an in many cases.
Yeah. This week I think was an interesting, this year has been super crazy. You have all these models coming out. Sora released, I think, in general access earlier this week or something, maybe, I don't know. Last week, and now Google announced VO2, and those videos are pretty incredible in terms of it's so hard. I mean, sometimes the physics is off and you're just like this, a human wouldn't move this way, but it's almost unnerving to see a realistic human like that, and you think there's something off, but actually you realize it's generated. But Apurva, when you see the state of video and how shockingly fast the gap was bridged, do you see that happening with sort of what you see with like Genie 1 2D side scrollers in Feb, Genie 2 in the middle of that was SEMA, which used No Man's Sky to create agents that could do stuff inside of these worlds by mere instruction, which has a huge play in robotics. Like 2024, this is what's happened, right? And
so actually, before I answer the question, I'm just curious, how many people have tried to diffuse a video here? Like actually tried to produce a video from an AI model? Anybody? A couple of folks? A few folks. Just curious, I mean, what were you feeling? Like, did you have a sense of anticipation? Were you kind of excited about what might come out? Were you, like, just curious? Yeah.
Also depends on what model they used. I think Runway, or if you've done Flux or Kling or anyone. Sure.
Yeah. Hi guys. So as a creative person who's been making videos and just doing a lot of design, I wanted to see how well AI will replicate, the fingers and all of the movements.
The tells, those are the tells, yeah.
And it was just really fascinating because the anticipation aspect was with regards to, I can't really tell what the difference is when I look at it, but it is unsettling as a human being because we can subconsciously tell that it's weird.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I did it more from the standpoint of where the tech is today, right? It's definitely not there today, but give it a few years. Years is a stretch, but I think another 12 months, it'll definitely get there. Already people are using it for maybe 5-10 seconds clips, one single shot. You can get away with a lot of it, right? So, but I think where it is right now, given how I still consider AI in its infancy, and you throw in quantum computing in the mix, honestly, it's going to be very, very exciting where that tech leads. But there's a whole ethical question around that.
Yeah, and so actually a good segue. I think probably after this question we can open it up to the audiences for their questions.
No, thanks for the perspective. That's super helpful. So I'm going to just get a little bit geeky here. So the way video or even image diffusion, right? Any of these image diffusers, they're called diffusers. So whether it's DALL-E or Midjourney or whatever, the way they work literally is that the image is synthesized from noise. So you literally start with white noise, and then slowly the image starts to form. And actually what I find personally even more interesting than the end result of some of these video diffusers is actually watching this video emerge from noise, actually. Because it literally is like, it's hallucinating. It's literally dreaming up something that didn't exist, which I just find fascinating. But one of the things that, when you see it kind of synthesizing these images or videos in this way, you realize how fundamentally different. It's a very data-centric, very implicit approach of creating something new versus, we are very used to, at least on the computer, like using very explicit approaches, right? You shape it, you specify exactly what you want. And it's a bit weird to just have this thing kind of come up with something out of noise, basically, out of nothing. And that is also one of the biggest issues currently with creative AI, is that it's very, very hard to control it. It's very hard to tell it actually what you want. It's amazing at coming up with the first thing. It's like, wow, oh man, it produced this, like, I just gave it a prompt, or I gave it an input image, and boom, it came up with like a 20-second shot. Amazing. Takes a bunch more work and a lot of people, a lot of time to be able to do that. So that first thing out of the gate is really amazing, but then turning that into what you actually want. Again, if you remember, like as a creative person, if I'm actually trying to express not just the first thing that came out of AI, but something specific, that is a much, much bigger challenge. Actually, mostly I would say that a lot of the foundation models, frankly, the generative AI models that we see largely being used today, where in fact the core technology, the transformer models, diffusers go back to 2017, 2018 is where most of this innovation happened. Now we are largely seeing it kind of getting more adoption. And more the center of gravity and the energy is shifting towards how do you control these models and how do you control them creatively.
Sorry, yeah.
Just to kind of add to what Apurva said is that, like he mentioned how hard it is to get it right in video, and video is a passive medium. Everyone's experience of it is pretty much the same. The emotion it evokes might be different, but the video itself remains the same for everyone. In a game, which is an interactive medium, everyone's experience can be different with it. How you play it, where you go in the game, who you meet in the game. So it's even harder when it's so interactive and to get it right.
Yeah, but that kind of brings up the last point, which was interesting, is that the recent sort of Jonathan Lai, so I think in August he wrote about how games and video are merging. Because if you look at sort of Genie 2 now and in Genie 1, both of these are really what you call as a video engine, where it's generating video frames that are interactive. And when you have that, and you have this Gen Z, Gen Alpha growing up in games, and videos themselves are interactive, then you really have this world where, instead of creating a Bandersnatch, you're generating one because you can choose your own adventure and it's playable. So that could be an interesting world where, there's no difference between making a film and making a game because you're using the same diffusion model. So with that, we'll open up for questions. Any questions for our amazing panel, right there. So just say your question, address it to who you want it answered from.
Yeah, I especially wanted to ask Apurva, sir. So with your history about robotics, what I wanted to ask is, when do you think the first AI NPC will be created who would be living a separate life? By that I mean, ever since its creation, it will be living just like the rest of us. And these kind of AI NPCs would be implemented in games, as real, if you get what I mean.
And do you want to introduce yourself too? Sorry.
I'm Swam Parekh.
Okay. Thanks for the question, So, NVIDIA has done a fair amount of work in NPCs. I think there's still a gap. Like, I do think that programmed NPCs or NPCs with specific, game-specific behaviors, I think will likely start showing up in probably a couple of years. Like, so already there are games that are building NPCs with AI, generative AI, both. So the latest release of Unreal Engine, for example, allows you to input text and then does lip sync for the character. There's a really interesting startup called Cartwheel that lets you prompt actions and create animation cycles from it. So the sort of individual pieces are there. I think what's missing to create a truly dimensional AI NPC is this idea of intuitive psychology, intuitive understanding of the world, which we take for granted, like even common sense, for example, like we take these things for granted. Currently, AI models need lots and lots of data to even learn simple patterns or simple behaviors. So a lot, you might have heard of the term AGI or artificial general intelligence, and the idea really, if at least the way I think about it, the way I boil it down is that if I can learn with a lot smaller amount of data, if you have an NPC that you are interacting with, if it can learn from observing you, even your actions, and learn very quickly, I think that's the missing piece right now.
There's a really interesting sort of, I think Google last year released a really interesting sort of NPC. There's a GitHub link, I'll send it over after this. But what they trained was really, it's in Unity. They've trained sort of like almost like a dog brain, right? So it doesn't have like higher degrees of consciousness. But they trained it also on some 1960s beat poetry and generally what is the larger idea of beat philosophy. And they kind of give it a basic sort of motivation engine and they can let it run cycles by itself, just like you would run in simulation. And it began to develop interesting behavior. So that's something that it's a very cheap model to run and it displays interesting sort of emergent behavior where they gave it these critters and those critters are something that it's got a basic brain which says, I feel hungry or I feel fearful, and it lives on the mountain. It likes to live alone, and it actually ends up, if you give it food, it develops a relationship with you. So that's sort of early forms of, designing these kind of NPCs which can have sort of this, in some sense, emergent behavior, but are designed with sort of these core principles in mind. And it's a public one, so you can download it and you can play it around with Unity as well. So yeah, just thought I'll add that in there. Yeah, so just can you hold on to it? Let's see if there's none other, and then we can come back to you as a follow-up one. Any other questions in the audience for Munjal?
Hi, I'm Munjal from Graffiti Studios. So my question here is, we are seeing certain AI models which are very good specifically at doing certain things. Like for text, there is a particular model for images. But and this question is more for Apurva, but where do you see the tech today potentially for like a managerial AI, which is managing of each of these sort of engines? In a way, I sort of equate this more to a studio model, where you have a producer who's driving each of these talents to eventually produce something. Do you think that tech is there? Do you think there's already something happening in that space?
Yeah, no, so I think from some of the early models, right, so ChatGPT today, I think has 16 different models. And there is so when you type in your prompt, there's another, there's one model that actually figures out which of these 16 other models should answer your question. So some of that sort of model composition is already happening. When it comes to diffusion, though, it's a little tricky because you can't have different models diffuse different things. It kind of has to happen simultaneously. And so when it comes to diffusion, you have more multimodal models which take different kinds of inputs and then goes into this totally mysterious black box brain that all AI models are today because they're deep neural networks, and then spits something out, right? But when it comes to, in terms of, the way that we think about brains physiology or psychophysiology, right? There is like two types of brains, thinking fast, thinking slow. The fast brain is more like a generative model. The slower brain has more reasoning capabilities, and that's where I think you'll see more model composition actually taking place.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, I'm Rishi Raj Malik, and looking at you, a lot of questions are coming in my mind, but just one question from a very India perspective. How do you move kids from PUBG to some more important? You're not making special forces, out of the kids, right? So how do you kind of drive that innovation or drive that revolution where you kind of make those kids, into something more innovative or cognitive, like Minecraft, right? For example, there's a game like Minecraft. How do you drive kids to play more Minecraft than PUBG, right? So basically, and it will be a problem worldwide, right? And the other point is that, India-centric, parents are more, averse to gaming. If you ask any Indian parent, right, they'll be more averse to, okay, if you play more, then you won't study more, right? So that's the reason why you have this gaming market very low in India. The penetration of India in the gaming market low in India primarily being is that our Indian psyche, right? When you compare it to the West or the Asian countries, like, assuming this particular, setup was there in some other country, you would have probably want to book a, bigger stadium, right? So that's where it is. And the second, part, when I look at the, from a tech perspective, right, that I've heard, since you work with the DARPA and all, just the news that I heard, that people are working on, combining, creating a wormhole, okay, between classical computing and quantum computing, where, you jump from Proxima Centauri to, the Earth. A blink of a second. So how does gaming help in that, right? If that is a probability, right? And the third question, the use case that comes in my mind is how do you, basically create games more intuitively, right? Like Mindmaze is one company when you look at it, right? So they have, for physiotherapy, they have created games, right? So that's something that really, comes to the mind when so a lot of things, yeah.
Okay, I'll take the PUBG Minecraft one. I think a PUBG, there's a lot of factors and forces that make people play that game. One is that it works on any phone, it's free, and there's peer pressure. Your friends are playing it, your kids in school are playing it, and that's it, and then all your influencers that you follow are playing it. So I think that creates this perfect storm, and also it's a fantasy, whereas Minecraft is a game that requires an investment. It requires you to give time. It doesn't look as flashy as a PUBG. It's very blocky. It looks very retro. Until you get into the meat of it and you know what the game really has to offer, it takes a few hours. And I think that's the challenge. I think also it requires education. Games like Roblox, which allow you to create games within Roblox, which you can actually monetize. There are kids and there are people around the world who are making games, who quit their jobs and their own game studios to create games within Roblox. So I think it's a combination of factors. One is that PUBG is just one of those things in India which became a cultural phenomenon because of all these factors. It's cheap, it's free, it works on every device you could possibly play it on. I think that's the issue, but also it's also about education, because PUBG is actually a game that's meant to be played by older kids, 16 and above, which no one knows about. Every game, like every film, has an age rating, and I think it's important to educate parents, educators, and kids that every game has a certain age requirement, and we should be mindful to know that and implement that. That's very important. I mean, every device you own, whether it's a PlayStation or a mobile phone, they all have parental controls built in, and you can prevent a kid from downloading an app that's not meant for him. But I think it's about educating people about making sure that those rules are followed.
So I would also say that like any art, gaming is an art form. The parents might say, "Oh, I don't want my kids playing games all game," but essentially they are interacting with a creative force, and they are like developing their brains based off of it. I try not to think of it as like slop that they're just ingesting like Doritos. Like they really do interact with the game. Like it's not necessarily junk food. It is a creative activity that they are making active choices in rather than passively ingesting. So I think that's something important to think about when young kids play any sort of game. That they are learning from it. And like developing skills that they will use. I know it seems trivial, but in reality, it is something very introspective and a powerful tool for there have been studies that kids that play games weigh their decisions better as adults. Like it's something to like process and realize that it's not just slop. It's something fun for them, and it helps them achieve greater things in life.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jayesh from Swamazon, and my interest would be to know the kind of the coding, the language that could be ideally used with this AI model to develop some good games with the creativity that we can have in mind. So, like I know of upcoming language called Mojo that's scaling up. Metaverse is a technology where again this Mojo is applicable. So, in this kind of business model, what is the right?
So similar to my statement before, engineers are artists. They are creative forces. I think it's super important. Like even if you use it as like a sidekick, like GitHub has a like AI tool that you can use, but it is very important, especially when you're just learning, to really put your fingers in the clay. It's really important to not use it as a crutch in your learning and development of any tool. Put your fingers in the clay. If you need it as like something to like rub ideas off of, that's fine. But it's like you'll become a better engineer the less you use it. What's the GitHub one called? It's called Side Hack, something like that. Copilot.
Python remains kind of the primary lingua franca for AI. And even if you're trying to build, an AI model for gaming, you would still use things like Python and PyTorch, which I'm sure you're familiar with. On the gaming side, you'd want to combine it with things like Verse, which is the new language from Unreal Engine, or Lua. C# is for Unity. So those would be the languages you'd want to look for there. Yeah.
I loved how it took two non-engineers for the engineer to finally take over and say use Python. All right. Yes, for our youngest member in the audience, second youngest.
Do you think there'll be a point where like hardware won't keep up to the growth of software? For example, like recently there was this new release, the Indiana Jones game. So like the game required ray tracing, it required a lot of VRAM, and most people are saying that you can't run it over 60 FPS without requiring an RTX 4090. So won't there be a point where hardware won't be able to keep up with the software?
You should keep asking your mother to keep giving you new upgrades every year. It keeps us in business.
How old are you?
11.
Wow, very, very cool. Huh? So you're already familiar with ray tracing. That's pretty awesome. You're ahead of the curve.
Very good question.
Yeah. So basically, there are two potential routes. One is that more of this might get done in the cloud, right? So are you familiar with the concept of pixel streaming? Yeah, so you can actually have pixel streams for gaming too. As internet connections get faster, and you can kind of have the compute in the cloud and still have it streamed to the game. Typically, latency has been an issue with that, but that's getting better. Both the software for streaming is getting better, and internet connections are getting better. And the second, I think we discussed, which is a bit more longer term, is that you might in the future have AI models that might generate the visualization rather than having a renderer. So that's the other potential. Do you want to?
Your question was, will the hardware ever be outpaced by the software? I would say yes. Like all this stuff is digital, but essentially everything digital is a physical act. It takes lots of processing power to do like video AI generation and like any sort of AI generation, because you're essentially doing thousands of Google searches when you're developing like gen art and stuff like that. So you might hit a potential of reaching a like data limit of it, and then you have a point where once you hit that, then your Gen AI, if you produce enough of it, that you will only be sourcing Gen AI because that will be the medium, and then you'll be pulling nothing but like hallucinations from each model. So that is a fear amongst like Gen AI people that I know. I think they're trying to do like different workarounds where like they match each like AI image with, but like I'm not smart enough to necessarily know how they might solve that problem. But yeah, please.
Since this is the last question, so software always goes ahead of hardware. Simple as that. Because before the 4090 launches, they need to predict when they're making a game what will be the state of hardware. So think about the PlayStation. When the PlayStation comes out, Sony kind of understands what the specs are. And it tells its studios, these are what the specs are. So they try and build, because when you build a game, it takes 2-3 years. So you have to predict that the hardware will be ahead. So generally software always ends up looking better because they assume the hardware will arrive to do it. But it can't be too forward. Because if it's too forward, then it won't work. So to your point, there's always like a predictive cycle and they try to match it. So that's sort of the shorter answer. So what you're saying is absolutely right, and the 4090 example ends up just being compared to the hardware sometimes, when games come out, that's why FPSs are lower, because they're actually designed for a better spec and they have to wait for the hardware to catch up with full ray tracing, like for example in Cyberpunk, where it would run only on a 3090 if you're doing full, not as well on a 2080.
What kind of rig are you rocking right now?
Yeah. What is your computer? Yeah, so that's why the PlayStation makes sense. Yeah. You got answers from everybody.
I know, right?
So there's recently a new campaign that Xbox launched, and it's called "This is an Xbox." And that ad just shows you every device that you currently own that could be an Xbox. And Indiana Jones is an Xbox game. So what they basically say in that ad is that your TV is an Xbox, your phone is an Xbox. All it is basically, eventually the plan is to get rid of the hardware entirely. There won't be an Xbox console in the future. It's all going to be streamed like Netflix is. And all you will need is a display and a controller. And that's the vision, and it's not that far away. It doesn't require Gen AI or any of it. It's already there.
Thank you everybody for being such a phenomenal audience, and thank you all for being on time.
Thanks, Samir. This whole conversation started when I met Apurva at Samir's house. But thank you so for skillfully moderating the conversation. Apurva, I know we've stalked you for a year to make this happen. Thank you, Frank. And thank you, Samir number 2, who we worked with several times in the past. Thank you all for being here, and to IFB, our partners, for collaborating with us. We've had a great year. We have one more program before we close for 2024. That is happening on Friday at the Royal Opera House. It is an ensemble of jazz and Kathak. So in case you're interested, just stalk us on social media and find us. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.